Do you know how medieval lovers whispered sweet nothings to each other? Were their terms of affection as charming as "my darling" or "my love"? Prepare to discover the hilarious and sometimes bewildering medieval terms of endearment from the 14th and 15th centuries that would make a modern heart skip a beat perhaps from laughter. Number 1. My little mouse. In the bustling, often chaotic world of the medieval age, where shadows danced on rough stone walls and the scent of woodsmoke mingled with the earthy smell of the land, finding comfort and closeness was a treasure. People lived closely within tight-knit communities, and relationships were often forged out of necessity as much as affection. Yet, within the confines of these lives, tenderness bloomed and lovers sought ways to express their deepest feelings. One might expect grand pronouncements, words drawn from chivalric romances of knights and ladies, full of shining armor and courtly love. Sometimes those grand words were certainly spoken. But sometimes, too, the words were utterly, wonderfully, and strangely ordinary, even a little comical to our ears today. The phrase, "my little mouse," might sound like a simple, perhaps even charming endearment. We still use mouse today, sometimes for a small, quiet, or cute person. But in the medieval context, and when we think about the realities of daily life, it takes on a slightly different, perhaps more intriguing layer. Picture a medieval home. It was often a busy place, with multiple generations living under one roof, perhaps a single large room or maybe a few small chambers if the family possessed more wealth. The floors were often made of packed earth or rough timber, sometimes covered with rushes which were refreshed regularly. Within these spaces, small creatures like mice were constant companions. They scurried in the wainscoting, nibbled at discarded crumbs, and were generally regarded with a mix of resignation and often irritation. They were not exactly cherished household pets in the way a modern cat or dog might be. They were pests, a sign of less than perfect hygiene and a threat to meager food stores. So when a medieval lover, perhaps a sturdy farmer with hands calloused from the plow, or a diligent weaver whose fingers were nimble with wool, called his beloved "my little mouse," what did it truly mean? Was it purely about size and perceived delicateness, a small, quiet person perhaps? Or was there an underlying humor to it, an acknowledgement of the shared reality of their existence? The beloved might have been small, yes, but also nimble, perhaps quick-witted, or even a bit elusive, darting in and out of the domestic sphere. Term could have suggested a quiet industry, a person who busied themselves with household tasks, moving efficiently and unobtrusively, much like a mouse searching for sustenance. It speaks to a certain realism in medieval affection, a comfort with the mundane and even the slightly unglamorous aspects of life. Consider the practicalities of a medieval household. Food was precious. A mouse, despite its small size, could represent a genuine threat to a family's winter stores of grain or cheese. So to call someone "my little mouse" might also carry a subtle hint of playful ownership, a delightful acknowledgement of a creature that, though it might cause trouble, was ultimately harmless and familiar within the domestic landscape. Could be seen as an intimate term, one used only between those who truly understood each other's world, who shared the same worries about keeping food safe from pests, and who could find a touch of humor in the everyday struggles. It was not a grand romantic gesture found in the songs of troubadours, but rather a quiet, lived-in term of endearment, perhaps whispered over a meager meal or during a shared moment of quiet before the hearth. Chroniclers of the period, though not usually recording such intimate details, hint at a robust, earthy humor among the common folk. Ballads and folk tales often featured animals, sometimes personified, and frequently with a knowing wink towards their real-life counterparts. A mouse might be seen as wily, resourceful, surviving in a harsh world. To call someone "my little mouse" could, therefore, also be an acknowledgement of their resilience, their ability to navigate the challenges of medieval life with a quiet determination. It might suggest a certain cleverness or adaptability, qualities highly valued when survival often depended on quick thinking and resourcefulness. It was a term that grounded affection in the everyday, in the shared experience of a world that was both challenging and, at times, unexpectedly charming in its simple realities. This term, then, is a window into a world where affection was expressed not always through lofty ideals, but through the shared experience of daily life, even down to the small, scurrying creatures that shared their homes. Number 2. My Beetle-Brow. The world of medieval endearments sometimes veered into descriptions that to modern ears sound less like declarations of love and more like a gentle critique. One such term, my Beetle-Brow, stands out. When we think of Beetle-Browed today, we often picture someone with heavy, thick eyebrows, perhaps furrowed in a perpetual scowl, someone who looks stern or even menacing. It is not typically a feature considered particularly alluring, let alone a term of endearment. Yet, in the medieval period, amidst the clanging of the smithy and the rustling of woolen cloaks, this phrase found its way into the lexicon of affection. To understand my Beetle-Brow, we must first delve into the medieval understanding of appearance and character. In an era before modern medical science, physiognomy, the art of judging character from facial features, was a common, if unscientific, practice. Specific facial characteristics were often linked to specific personality traits. Heavy, prominent eyebrows, or Beetle-Brows, were not universally condemned. Sometimes, they were associated with strength of character, seriousness, or a thoughtful nature. A man with such brows might be seen as steadfast, not easily swayed, perhaps even possessing a certain gravitas. For a woman, it might signify a practical mind, a certain unyielding spirit, or perhaps a depth that went beyond mere superficial beauty. Consider the pragmatic nature of medieval life. People did not live in a world obsessed with flawless, delicate beauty, standards like those often portrayed in modern media. Survival, diligence, and capability were often more highly prized attributes, especially in a partner. Person with a Beetle-Brow might have been perceived as someone serious, someone who could handle responsibilities, someone with a clear and perhaps intense gaze. For a person of status, such a feature might even convey authority and wisdom. A knight might have Beetle-Brows from constant squinting in the sun or from the intensity of battle. A scholar might possess them from long hours hunched over illuminated manuscripts. In a world where directness and strength were often necessary for daily living, a Beetle-Brow could be seen as an indicator of these very qualities. The humor in my Beetle-Brow, for us, comes from the stark contrast with contemporary ideas of romantic beauty. We tend to associate love with softness, light, and delicate features. The idea of embracing a Beetle-Brow as a mark of affection seems almost rebellious. Yet, it reveals a medieval appreciation for the earthy, the real, and the specific. It wasn't about an idealized, abstract beauty, but about recognizing and loving the distinct features of an individual, even those that might appear unconventional. It implies a deep familiarity, an intimacy that allowed one to tease or playfully highlight a characteristic that might otherwise be overlooked or even considered a flaw. It suggests a love that transcended superficiality, embracing the unique physicality of the beloved with a certain warmth and humor. Furthermore, medieval humor often involved a playful bluntness, a willingness to call things as they were, even affectionately. A term like my Beetle-Brow could have been used in a teasing, familiar way, a private joke between lovers that acknowledged a prominent feature while simultaneously affirming affection despite or even because of it. It is not a term one would likely find in a courtly romance where hyperbolic praise for delicate beauty was the norm. Instead, it speaks to the more common everyday relationships, the kind that thrived in villages and towns, among working folk and lesser gentry, where honesty and a good-natured ribbing were signs of true closeness. The use of my Beetle-Brow as an endearment paints a picture of relationships built on realism, shared understanding, and an affection that saw beyond the superficial. It speaks to a time when people valued strength, character, and a certain grounded presence. It was a world where a prominent brow might not be a mark against one's attractiveness, but rather a distinguishing feature, perhaps even a beloved one in the eyes of a true admirer. It reminds us that standards of beauty and expressions of affection are deeply rooted in their cultural and historical contexts, making what seems peculiar to us today entirely understandable, even charming, in its original setting. Number 3. My Sweet Cabbage. Food played an absolutely central role in medieval life. It was not just sustenance, it was wealth, a marker of status, a source of comfort, and a constant, often precarious concern. Unlike today, where most people have ready access to a wide variety of foods, the medieval diet was often limited, seasonal, and prone to scarcity. Grains like wheat and rye formed the basis of most meals, alongside vegetables that could be grown in local gardens or fields. Among these vegetables, the humble cabbage held a position of considerable importance. It was hardy, grew well in diverse climates, and could be stored for long periods, providing vital nutrients through the lean winter months when other fresh produce was scarce. It was a dietary staple, a food that could be relied upon. Given this context, the term "my sweet cabbage" begins to make a strange sort of sense as an endearment. To us, cabbage evokes images of a somewhat bland, perhaps even unpleasant vegetable, often boiled and served without much fanfare. It lacks the exotic allure of a honey or the delicate beauty of a rose. Yet, for a medieval person, cabbage would have signified something entirely different. It was dependable, nourishing, and available. Call someone my sweet cabbage could have been a declaration of profound appreciation for their solidity, their reliability, and their essential nature in one's life. It was a recognition of their foundational importance, much like cabbage was a foundation of the medieval diet. The sweet in sweet cabbage is also noteworthy. Medieval cabbages, especially those grown in rich soil and harvested at their peak, could indeed possess a subtle sweetness, particularly when cooked properly. The term sweet was not just about literal taste. It was also a broader descriptor for anything pleasant, dear, or agreeable. So, my sweet cabbage could be a way of saying, my dear, dependable, utterly essential one. It speaks to a deep practical love, one that valued substance over fleeting beauty, stability over excitement. It was a love that understood the importance of the everyday, the comfort of knowing that someone was always there, providing sustenance and stability, much like a well-tended patch of cabbage provided for the household. Imagine a busy medieval kitchen, perhaps in a manor house, or a prosperous farm. The smell of boiling cabbage, mingled with herbs and perhaps a bit of salted pork, would have been a comforting aroma, signaling a hearty, fulfilling meal. It represented provision, warmth, and the well-being of the family. To associate a loved one with such a fundamental and positive aspect of daily life suggests a profound level of affection and trust. It is a very grounded form of endearment, rooted in the realities of survival and the simple joys of sustenance. It implies a sense of contentment, a feeling that, with this person by your side, you were well provided for, both emotionally and practically. Furthermore, medieval culture often imbued everyday objects and plants with symbolic meaning. While not as overtly romantic as a rose, the cabbage with its tightly packed layers might have symbolized a person who was robust, resilient, and perhaps a little self-contained, but ultimately rich and nourishing at its core. could also suggest abundance and fertility qualities that were highly valued in an agrarian society. A robust cabbage patch meant a healthier family, a better chance of survival through harsh winters. Thus, associating a loved one with this humble but powerful vegetable was not a slight. It was a profound compliment of their essential value and life-giving presence. This term, my sweet cabbage, offers a delightful glimpse into the practical heart of medieval affection. It tells us that love was not always expressed with flowery prose, but often with words that spoke to the bedrock realities of life, to the deep appreciation for those who provided stability, comfort, and unwavering presence. It is hilariously straightforward by modern standards, devoid of any pretense, yet in its simplicity it reveals a deep, earthy truth about the nature of love in a time when true sweetness was often found in the most humble of provisions. Number 4. My Mopsy. Among the quirky tapestry of medieval endearments, my Mopsy presents a particularly curious thread. To our modern ears, Mopsy might conjure images of a floor cleaning tool, or perhaps a clumsy, disheveled appearance. It certainly does not immediately leap to mind as a term of affection. However, delve into the linguistic nuances and cultural context of the medieval period, and a different, perhaps more tender picture begins to emerge. The word Mopsy itself is a derivative, likely stemming from mop, but not in the cleaning sense. Instead, it was an older term that referred to a slightly plump, perhaps somewhat disheveled, but ultimately endearing young woman or girl. It carried connotations of softness, a certain endearing clumsiness, or a generally sweet and lovable disposition. It was a familiar, almost folksy term, much like one might use chubby or pudding today, but with a gentler, more affectionate touch. It evoked an image of a young person who was perhaps a little round, with a tousled head of hair, full of an innocent charm. Think of the medieval ideals of beauty, which often differed significantly from modern preferences for slenderness. A certain plumpness was often considered a sign of health, prosperity, and fertility. It indicated that one was well fed in a time when food scarcity was a constant concern. So to describe someone as Mopsy could have been a subtle compliment to their well-being and desirable attributes. It wasn't about being perfectly coiffed or elegantly slender. It was about a vibrant, healthy presence, a person who exuded warmth and a robust vitality. It suggests an affection that embraced a natural, unvarnished beauty, one that did not conform to rigid artificial standards, but celebrated the person as they truly were. Furthermore, the term Mopsy might have been particularly apt for a younger woman, perhaps a beloved daughter or a youthful wife, someone still growing into her full stature. It implies a certain playful intimacy, a recognition of her youthful exuberance, and perhaps a slightly unkempt but utterly charming appearance. It speaks to a love that found delight in imperfections, that saw beauty in naturalness, and that appreciated a person for their inherent sweetness rather than their adherence to conventional ideals. It's a term that suggests a comfort with familiarity, a kind of affection that exists within the close confines of a family or a deeply intimate relationship. The medieval period was not one of pristine cleanliness or perfect order, especially for the common folk. Homes were often crowded, work was physical, and appearances were often secondary to practicality. In such a world, a Mopsy might have been a natural, unpretentious beauty, a person whose appearance reflected a life lived fully and authentically. Turn, therefore, reflects a grounded sense of affection, one that valued genuine warmth and an easygoing nature over superficial polish. It is a term that feels inherently cozy, like a warm blanket on a cold night, suggesting a comfort in the presence of the beloved that was deep and unpretentious. The humor for modern ears then comes from the contrast with our contemporary associations. We hear Mopsy and think of something messy or ungraceful, but in its medieval context, It was a term of endearing affection, a gentle descriptive for someone beloved for their plumpness, their natural charm, and their sweet, perhaps slightly disheveled, disposition. It reminds us that love finds its own language, often drawing from the most unexpected corners of everyday life, and that what seems peculiar across centuries can, with a little understanding, reveal a surprisingly tender heart. Number 5. My goose. Animals, particularly domestic ones, were deeply woven into the fabric of medieval life. They were sources of food, labor, clothing, and companionship. It is not surprising, therefore, that many terms of endearment drew inspiration from the animal kingdom. While some animal-based endearments, like my dove or my lamb, rate with modern sensibilities, my goose strikes us as distinctly peculiar, even a bit silly. What could possibly be endearing about a goose? These birds are known for their loud honking, their territorial aggression, and a certain ungainly waddle. Yet, for a medieval lover, my goose might have been a term of genuine affection, laden with a surprising depth of meaning. To understand my goose as an endearment, we must consider the goose's significant role in medieval households. Geese were highly valued livestock. They provided meat, eggs, and feathers for bedding and quills. They were also excellent guard animals, their loud honking serving as an effective alarm system against intruders, human or animal. A well-fed flock of geese was a sign of a prosperous household, a symbol of security and resourcefulness. To call someone my goose could therefore have been a quiet acknowledgement of their value, their ability to provide, and their role in protecting the household. It was a term that spoke to practicality, to the deep appreciation for someone who contributed to the well-being and safety of the family. Beyond their utilitarian value, geese were also associated with certain characteristics that could be seen as endearing. They were known for their strong family bonds, often mating for life and fiercely protecting their young. This loyalty and protectiveness could easily be transferred as a compliment to a beloved partner. A goose might be seen as someone who was fiercely devoted, a steadfast companion, and a vigilant guardian of the family's welfare. It implies a deep trust and reliance, a recognition of the partner's unwavering presence and protective nature. Furthermore, medieval humor often involved a playful bluntness, a willingness to acknowledge physical traits, or even slightly awkward aspects of a person with affection. While geese might be perceived as clumsy, their waddle could also be seen as endearing or humorous in a private, intimate context. It was not about grand, idealized beauty, but about loving the unique, perhaps slightly unusual characteristics of the beloved. The loud honking, while disruptive, could also be interpreted as a sign of vitality, of a spirited presence, or even as a humorous nod to a particularly vocal or expressive partner. It suggests a relationship where affectionate teasing was common, where lovers could acknowledge each other's quirks with warmth and humor. In medieval literature and folklore, animals often held complex symbolic meanings. While some tales might poke fun at the goose's perceived foolishness, others might highlight its vigilance or its domestic importance. Call someone my goose could also carry a playful sense of ownership and domesticity, emphasizing their place within the home and their role as a central, cherished part of the household. It's a term that feels deeply rooted in the everyday realities of medieval life, a testament to a love that found beauty and value in the practical, the familiar, and even the slightly eccentric. The hilarity for modern audiences stems from the stark contrast between our contemporary perception of a goose, often as a somewhat silly or aggressive bird, and the medieval appreciation for its practical value and endearing traits. It reminds us that affection is shaped by culture and context, and that what seems peculiar to one era can be a profound compliment in another. My goose is a delightful window into a medieval love that valued utility, loyalty, and perhaps a touch of good-natured humor in its expressions of endearment. Number 6. In the medieval world, bread was far more than just a side dish. It was the staff of life. For the vast majority of people, from the poorest peasant to the wealthiest lord, bread was the absolute cornerstone of every meal, a fundamental source of sustenance and energy. Its presence on the table signified provision, security, and survival itself. A full loaf of bread represented well-being and the absence of hunger, a constant threat for many. The process of making bread, from the arduous labor of planting and harvesting grain to the skill of the miller and the baker, was central to the rhythm of life. Given its immense importance, it is perhaps not surprising that a medieval lover might have chosen to call their beloved "my loaf" as a term of profound endearment. To our modern sensibilities, "my loaf" might sound incredibly unromantic, even a bit odd. We associate bread with mundane necessity, not with passion or tenderness. Yet, for a medieval person, the connotations would have been entirely different. To call someone "my loaf" was to declare them utterly essential, life-sustaining, and a source of profound comfort and nourishment. It was a recognition of their foundational role in one's existence, a statement that they provided the very essence of well-being, both physical and emotional. It speaks to a practical, deeply grounded love, one that understood the true value of someone who made life possible and bearable. Consider the anxiety surrounding food in medieval times. Harvests could fail. Famine was a constant specter, and the simple act of having enough bread was a blessing. To have a loaf meant security. Therefore, to equate a beloved with a loaf was to say they were a source of unwavering reliability, a constant presence that provided comfort and banished the fear of want. It implies a sense of deep gratitude and dependence, not in a weak sense, but in the understanding that this person completed and sustained one's life. It suggests a love that transcended superficiality, rooted in the very real, tangible necessities of daily living. Furthermore, bread was not just about survival. It was also a symbol of domesticity, community, and hospitality. The breaking of bread was a communal act, a symbol of sharing and fellowship. Call someone "my loaf" could also encompass these warm communal associations. It suggested a partner who brought warmth, comfort, and a sense of shared abundance to the home. It speaks to a love that was homely and intimate, celebrated within the confines of shared meals and shared lives. It was a term that might have been whispered over a simple supper, acknowledging the quiet, enduring bond between two people who faced the world together, sharing their most basic needs and comforts. Texture and warmth of a fresh loaf also held significance. A good loaf was wholesome, comforting, and satisfying. To be someone's loaf was to be someone who was wholesome, comforting, and deeply satisfying to their very being. It was a testament to their comforting presence, their reliable nature, and their ability to bring a sense of fullness and contentment to life. This endearment is a powerful reminder that in times of scarcity, the most basic necessities become the most cherished symbols of love and security. The humor in "my loaf" for us comes from the stark contrast between our world of endless food choices and the medieval world where bread was paramount. It feels hilariously blunt, devoid of the romantic flourishes we expect. Yet, in its simplicity, it reveals a profound and earnest affection. It is a term that strips away all pretense and gets straight to the heart of what truly mattered in a medieval relationship: reliability, sustenance, and the comforting presence of a beloved who was as essential to one's life as the very bread they ate. It offers a glimpse into a time when love was expressed through the most fundamental and vital aspects of daily existence. Number 7. My heart's root. While many medieval terms of endearment strike us as amusingly peculiar, my heart's root sounds surprisingly poetic and earnest, even to modern ears. It avoids the literal bluntness of my cabbage or my loaf, and instead delves into a deeper, more metaphorical well of affection. Yet, there is a particular medieval resonance to this phrase that makes it uniquely evocative of its time, tying into both biological understandings and the powerful symbolism of nature. In the medieval worldview, rootedness was a concept of profound significance. Plants, especially trees and herbs, were understood to draw their very life force from their roots, which anchored them firmly to the earth and absorbed the essential nutrients needed for growth and flourishing. The root was the hidden foundational part, the source of all vitality, stability, and enduring existence. When applied to the human heart, the metaphorical meaning becomes exceptionally potent. Call someone my heart's root was to declare them the absolute, undeniable source of one's emotional life, the foundation of one's very being. It was a recognition that their presence provided the stability, nourishment, and essential life force that allowed one's own heart to thrive. Consider the medieval understanding of the human body and emotions. While not possessing modern scientific knowledge, medieval thinkers believed the heart was the seat of the soul, the core of emotions, and the center of vitality. Therefore, to say someone was the root of this vital organ was to place them at the absolute heart of one's existence. It was a declaration of deep foundational love, suggesting that without them one's emotional life, indeed one's very spirit, would wither and falter. It conveyed an unparalleled depth of connection, a bond that was not superficial or fleeting but deeply embedded and life-sustaining. This term speaks to an affection that was profound and enduring, like the ancient oak tree that stands firm against storms because of its deep roots. In a world where life could be precarious and uncertain, such a declaration offered a sense of unwavering stability and permanence. It suggests a partner who provided a steadying presence, a source of unwavering support, and emotional nourishment. It implies a love that was not merely passionate but foundational, the kind that weathered life's inevitable challenges because it was so deeply rooted. Furthermore, root often had associations with origin and lineage. Call someone my heart's root could also subtly imply that they were the source of one's deepest joy, the origin of one's greatest happiness. It is a beautiful image of dependence and mutual sustenance, where one person's emotional well-being is intrinsically linked to the other. It speaks to a recognition of the beloved's essential role in one's emotional landscape, a recognition that their presence sustained and enriched one's very being. While my heart's root may not sound hilariously funny today, its inclusion highlights the blend of earnestness and subtle cultural differences in medieval endearments. Its amusement for a modern audience comes from the slightly clinical, almost botanical precision of the metaphor. We might say the core of my heart or the depth of my soul, but root gives it a specific, earthy and medieval flavor that is both intriguing and subtly amusing in its directness. It is a powerful reminder that, even in seemingly poetic terms, the underlying cultural and scientific understanding of the time shapes the language of love, offering a glimpse into a world where metaphor was drawn directly from the natural world. Number 8. My drooping eyelid. Among the truly bewildering medieval terms of endearment, my drooping eyelid stands out as perhaps the most perplexing, and to modern ears, the most hilariously counterintuitive. We typically associate drooping eyelids with tiredness, age, or perhaps even a sign of illness. It is decidedly not a feature most people would highlight as alluring, or a mark of beauty worthy of affectionate address. Yet, in the medieval period, amidst the flickering candlelight and the earthy sense of daily life, this phrase, or similar expressions of a beloved's gaze, held a peculiar charm. To unravel the mystery of my drooping eyelid, we must delve into the medieval understanding of beauty, expression, and the subtle power of the gaze. Unlike our modern obsession with wide-eyed alertness and perfect symmetry, medieval aesthetics could be more nuanced and less overtly demanding. A drooping eyelid might not have been seen as a flaw, but as a characteristic feature that lent a particular expression to the eyes. Could suggest a certain languor, a gentle weariness, or perhaps even a contemplative deep gaze. It hints at a subtle, perhaps even mysterious allure, rather than a bold, open beauty. Consider the context of human interaction in an era without constant visual stimulation. The eyes were paramount. They were windows to the soul, and their expression could convey volumes. A drooping eyelid could have been perceived as creating an inviting, soft, or even sensual look. It might suggest a dreaminess, a quiet intensity, or a gaze that was particularly captivating because it was not overtly direct. It was not the wide, innocent stare of a young child, but perhaps the more experienced, knowing look of an adult who had seen much of life. This particular feature, therefore, could have been a distinctive, perhaps even beloved, part of a person's appearance that captivated their admirer. Moreover, medieval poetry and ballads often celebrated very specific, sometimes unusual physical attributes of the beloved. A mole, a particular curl of hair, or a unique gait might be highlighted as a mark of individuality and charm. In this vein, a drooping eyelid could have been singled out not as a defect, but as a unique and cherished characteristic that defined the beloved. It suggests a love that was deeply observant, one that paid close attention to the subtle nuances of a person's appearance and found beauty in their individuality, rather than conforming to generalized ideals. It was a term that bespoke a profound intimacy, a recognition of a specific, perhaps even private, detail that only a lover would notice and cherish. The term might also have been used playfully, in a teasing manner that was still undeniably affectionate. Medieval humor often involved a certain bluntness, a willingness to acknowledge physical realities with a knowing wink. Perhaps the beloved did indeed have a naturally heavy eyelid, and the endearment was a fond, gentle poke at this characteristic, transforming a perceived imperfection into a unique mark of affection. It speaks to a relationship where honesty and a certain level of good-natured ribbing were signs of true closeness and comfort. The sheer hilarity of my drooping eyelid for modern audiences comes from the stark contrast between our beauty standards and those of the medieval period. We associate beauty with alertness and brightness, not with anything that suggests fatigue or a lack of vigor. Yet, in its original context, it reveals a fascinating insight into a love that found charm and allure in the most unexpected of places, celebrating individuality and the subtle power of a distinctive gaze. It is a testament to the fact that what one culture deems peculiar, another might find utterly captivating, proving that love truly is blind to conventional notions of attractiveness and instead sees with the eyes of the heart. Number 9. My own pig snout. Among the truly outlandish medieval terms of endearment, my own pig snout stands out as a masterpiece of bewildering affection. To our modern sensibilities, the image it conjures is anything but romantic. A wet, snuffling, perhaps muddy pig snout. It seems utterly devoid of grace, beauty, or any quality we typically associate with a term of endearment. Yet this phrase was, in its time, a genuine declaration of affection, revealing a fascinating depth about medieval values, humor, and perceptions of beauty. To understand my own pig snout, one must first acknowledge the profound importance of pigs in medieval society. Pigs were immensely valuable livestock. They were relatively easy to keep, hardy, and provided a rich source of meat, fat, and other products crucial for survival. A healthy, plump pig was a sign of prosperity, good husbandry, and a full larder. Pig, far from being a symbol of disdain, was a creature of practical value and often a source of wealth for a household. Therefore, to associate a beloved with a pig, or specifically its snout, was not necessarily an insult, but potentially a recognition of their preciousness and their contribution to one's well-being. The snout itself, when viewed through medieval eyes, might have held different connotations. While we might see it as coarse, it is also a symbol of industriousness and a keen sense of smell, vital for rooting out food. Pig's snout is often characterized by its plumpness, its soft, slightly rubbery texture, and perhaps a certain endearing curiosity as it snuffles about. In an era where a certain roundness or plumpness was often considered a sign of health, fertility, and prosperity. In stark contrast to modern ideals of thinness, to call someone "my own pig snout" could have been a playful, affectionate nod to their healthy plumpness, their vitality, or even their robust good looks. It suggests a love that embraced the earthy, the real, and the tangible aspects of a person's appearance, rather than aspiring to ethereal, abstract beauty. Furthermore, medieval humor was often direct, earthy, and found amusement in the realities of daily life, including the farmyard. Affectionate teasing was common, and a term like "my own pig snout" could have been a highly intimate, familiar joke between lovers. It was not a term for public pronouncement, but perhaps a private whisper, shared with a knowing glance and a smile. It implies a relationship built on deep familiarity, where comfort allowed for playful ribbing and a mutual appreciation for each other's quirks. It suggests a bond, where formal romanticism gave way to genuine, unpretentious affection. Possessive "my own" further emphasizes the intimacy and cherished nature of the term. It's not just a pig snout, it's my own pig snout, belonging uniquely to the speaker and thus uniquely cherished. This suggests a love that embraced the beloved's unique, perhaps unconventional features with a sense of private delight and ownership. It speaks to a deep, unvarnished affection that saw beauty and value in the most unexpected, practical, and even humorous attributes. The sheer hilarity of "my own pig snout" for us today is a direct consequence of the vast cultural shift in our perceptions of beauty, animals, and appropriate language for expressing affection. It reminds us that what one society deems endearing, another might find utterly absurd. Yet, in its medieval context, it was a term rooted in practical value, earthy humor, and a surprising depth of intimate affection. It is a powerful illustration of how the language of love adapts to the realities of its time, finding charm and significance in the most unexpected corners of human experience, even down to the humble and valuable pig.